never live in a fantasy world. Never live in a world where there's, this everything is a fantasy and we're going to get there and let's bury our heads, even though this is happening. I'm not saying worry. Worry is not the answer. Mm-hmm. It's just dealing with the brutal facts.
And knowing that just pushing forward, doing the things that need to be done will eventually lead to the outcome that you're hoping for. In this episode, we're going to dive a bit deeper into a subject that we discussed a few episodes back. And that was about becoming more self-aware. But Jon, as we were talking recently, you wanted to also add in an aspect of this that you feel is extremely important too, which is becoming more self-aware as a leader and using that awareness to become a better leader in your life as well as business. And you shared a story with me the other day about some wisdom that your father shared with you that stuck with you most of your life, it seems like. And I think that would be a great story to begin and start this episode off with, if you don't mind sharing that.
Yeah, and I think that the main theme to this episode is really about leadership. But it's hard to talk about leadership unless you have awareness. That's literally self-awareness and really understanding. I guess master thyself, and then you could master understanding other people. So that's the point. It was funny. This was a story I told you after we spoke with our episode last week when I think it was last week when we talked about the spelling bee. I was the last person chose the spelling bee.
Right. Yeah.
And then another part of the aspect hit me that I've been thinking about for my entire life, but I never realized where it was coming from. And it just hit me. So the story really is, so it was sixth grade, and I made it very clear I'm a bad speller. I've always been a bad speller. Got a little better over the years. I think with spell correct, it's easier. But I was a bad speller in elementary school, sixth grade. And I remember the teacher would always give me back, with the red marks, all the words and so forth. And so I came home one day really frustrated, feeling, that I can't seem to spell things the right way. Or maybe maybe I'm having an issue. They probably thought I had some learning disabilities, but I just couldn't put the letters in the right, the letters in the right way and so forth. So my dad looked at me and said, "Listen, don't get yourself so upset." He said, "I want you to understand something. It's not important that you're not a good speller. What's more important is the fact that you're not a good speller, and understand the fact that you're not a good speller. Because this way, when you're doing work, you have your dictionary next to you, and you can look up the words, and you can find out how to spell them. And I do that now to this day." That was a little chunk of advice that, to me, is probably more precious than anything I've learned in my life. And it wasn't just about spelling. It's about understanding your weaknesses and how to overcome your weaknesses, whether that is having it as someone to support you and help you through different parts, whether it's having or a reference, someone you can get, if you need to find an answer, you get a reference from someone that can look that information up for you, or that is understanding self-awareness in yourself that a lot of people don't have. They don't understand what they don't know. And I stress this so much through these podcasts about understanding your weaknesses, because by understanding your weaknesses, you actually uncover your strengths. It's like it's an interesting way to look at it. And I don't mean to be pessimistic and go, let's just focus on our weaknesses and let's go down the tube with that. But the reality is, for me, it's about getting a good understanding of my weaknesses and so forth. So that to me, over the years, that has been a chunk of advice that I've got more mileage out of than I have anything else. And I never even realized it. So I wanted to get it out there. And I think that's a good key point as we talk about leadership.
I think, everybody knows that they have weaknesses. I don't care how confident, a person are, and maybe, or a person is, I should say, but, maybe it's the people that are extremely confident that also recognize their weaknesses and recognize them too much, to a point that they use this almost fake self-confidence to make themselves feel, better about their weaknesses and so forth. But I know that one of the things that you said, especially when it comes to, your investments and things like that in the VC world, one of the things that you really care about is knowing that an entrepreneur, or the business owner, or whatever, knows and understands their weaknesses. And that's even a question that you ask sometimes, when you're, I don't know, is that in the very beginning, or is that kind of as you start going through the process?
No, we actually do. We actually test our entrepreneurs. We have a test that they take. It's literally like 50 questions, and we get a good feeling for what the person is good at and not good at. And it's almost like a manual when you get the report back. And at some point, plan on having some of my partners on the fund, especially my two GP partners in the fund, to discuss this. And we'll get into that in the future, but it's really great. It's kind of like a direction on how to work with that particular entrepreneur. That also exists for employees. And if you remember way back, Craig, we actually did a test like that at NHA, which had to be probably 17 years ago, where we were actually literally, I was hiring a new gentleman into the company, and we did the test, and he came with directions. It was like, I know how to work with Jim, how to communicate what Jim's good at, what Jim's bad at, what he's, so you utilizing those kind of tools, and I would say as a leader, using those kind of tools to utilize for employees to help you understand their weaknesses and strengths. A lot of it's not apparent. Some of it's very apparent. But the only thing I wouldn't say disagree with you, but we do believe that people do, understand some of their weaknesses, but I find it crazy sometimes. There are people that just really don't have an understanding what they're good or bad at. I told you the story of the chief operating officer I had hired years ago. With 3 months, he was gone,
Right.
Because the things he told me that he was strong at, he was really weak at. And actually, he had some strengths and other things that he didn't even mention, but they weren't great stuff to keep him on board.
Sure.
So we decided to move him out of the company. But self-deception is a big problem. And leaders, more than anything, famous leaders in big companies have these glaring issues staring them right in the face, and yet a lot of them choose not to do anything about it. And
right.
And believe that they can handle everything. And that's just not the case.
So two quick questions. When you get the results for those tests back, does the entrepreneur or whoever takes the test, do they get those results at the same time, or do you hold the results back to question them first and see if they recognize the same things that the test actually puts out there as far as the answers?
We do both. Most of them we show them, and so they understand. Sometimes they'll fight it, which is like, oh no, that's not me. Let me tell you something. I've taken one of those tests. Those things are, and I've done them for my employees, even more recent with Thrive. And when we read them out loud, my management team, we read those things. We laughed because it was so perfect. Each person, not everybody recognized that they had these, strengths or weaknesses, or the way but the ones that did laughed at themselves. The other ones were a little bit like it was like a pushback a little bit. But ultimately, I felt like I hired the right people because ultimately there wasn't a mess.
Sure.
There wasn't someone who got really upset about it. They understood and they got a better understanding um, why why their score kind of came out that way.
Right,
So
right.
it's kind of interesting. So I totally uh, believe that you should look at some of these. We'll share some of those in the coming episodes. We'll share actually the tests themselves. I don't recall the name of them, so I won't. We'll go in there, but the gentleman Richard Baggett, who is my partner in the fund and was also came in later on as my COO after we got rid of that other CEO,
Mm-hmm. Right.
COO. But he was the one that really kind of initiated those tests and doing those things. So we'll talk about that. I think it's intriguing. I think they're amazing too because it
Mm,
really does help. It really helps you navigate.
sure. Eh, one of the things you just mentioned too is that when you read them around to each other, you kind of laughed, and it was because of how accurate they were. But you said something about the fact that there was strengths also that showed up that some people weren't aware of. These certain strengths that maybe they kind of just let go or didn't concentrate on, or probably should concentrate on more. Uh, were there some things that for you that showed up that you thought to yourself, wow, I didn't realize that this was actually a strength for me? Or was there a common strength that showed up for people that they didn't realize that they had, that you said to yourself, this is interesting that this shows up as a strength on, a couple people, and they didn't realize that they had this?
Yeah, I guess I've taken that test multiple times, so I guess I can go way back when I took the test and didn't really know myself as well. Um, because of course, Craig, we evolve, right, man? We
Sure.
all evolve. So I wasn't as evolved back then. And I took that test and there were some things that surprised me. But the more recent one, it was like, oh yeah, no, this is me. I was
Mm,
kind of glad. I was like, boy, if it's right with me, then I know it's going to be right with everyone else. So
mm,
I wasn't surprised the more recent tests I took, but I would say early on, um, not really getting all the understanding of my weaknesses and strengths, not fully um, being aware of that. And by the way, those are the things that make you a better leader too, right? That awareness and getting
sure.
better at awareness. If you're not, you know, the smart people, I just think the people that really are successful, it's not like these brilliant, amazing people. It's these people that just evolve every day. Every day they go to bed with one little chunk of information that makes them just a little pinch better. And, so I think evolving and understanding your about yourself, evolving is a lot of it. Just kind of digging in deep about yourself, but learning a little bit more about yourself every day is really makes a great leader.
Mm. You mentioned also self-deception a few minutes back too. What are some of the most common self-deceptions that leaders or entrepreneurs or business, or even executives in a business that may be more intrapreneurs than entrepreneurs, that they fall victim to? And are there ways that you found that you can avoid those things?
Yeah, I mean, well, we talked about the Dunning Kruger kind of self deception, right? It was that people that really had the people that knew very little about a lot about a lot of things. I recall had this deception that they were they had self deception that they believed that they knew more than they actually really did, and the really intelligent ones, and the really I would say, and I shouldn't say intelligent and stupid. Let's say evolved and unevolved people, the ones that were really evolved, actually didn't know all their strengths.
Mm,
They weren't fully engaged with all their strengths. Knew their weaknesses, but they weren't engaged with their strengths. Just the opposite with the other group. The unevolved group didn't, had no idea what their weaknesses were. Had no idea what were and thought they were really good at things that they really sucked at. So that's self deception. And that just, you know what? Sometimes it's just like, to me, it's laziness, not working on yourself. And I
Mhm.
think, when we listen to some questions, I did get a chance to see some of the questions that for the first time from outside that that some of the people asked. And there are some things there that you just got to create time for yourself to understand and listen. So we'll go through those later. But yeah, being a leader creates this unwavering resolve. So, we talked about the word paradox. I talked about it a lot.
Mhm.
Um, and I want to kind of get into that because to me, from the first episode to right now, what we're going to talk about, I'm going to repeat a few things, but it was like walking around with these two competing thoughts, right? I'm gonna build this business and I'm gonna be resolved and I'm gonna create this business and it's gonna happen. The second is the reality of what's going on in the world, what's going on, what are my challenges, what are all these things that this business could fail, right? You got to go into a business or build a business with the understanding of the reality, whether it's depending on the industry, but the 1 out of 10 businesses will make early stage companies. You know, that's kind of the record out there. There's probably two or three more that I'll probably do uh, possibly, but anywhere between 10 and 30% of the businesses that start will make it. And I really believe the ones that make it are the ones that are realistic about those stats. Don't hide them. Don't close your eyes to them. Know that it's there. Know it's a challenge, and know you got to get through the challenge. Um, there is the paradox. The paradox is I'm going to win. We're going to be resolved. Don't know. There's a lot of ambiguity here. And then the other piece is, hey, I could fail miserably. Things could fall apart, but I'm going to continue to move forward. So those competing things go on. Um, this brings me to probably one of the greatest stories um, that as a leader that I've read, and I've read his books, and I've read about him, stories about him. Um, I never got to meet the man, but it was General Stockdale, um, who was, I guess they called it the Hanoi Hilton. It was the prison in Vietnam um, that he was captured, him and the soldiers, and I think it was like from 1965 to like 1973. So he spent about 8 years
Wow.
in a Vietnamese prison. What was interesting was, and there was great stories about John McCain too, who got to that. But what was interesting about Stockdale was that there were groups of soldiers that were together, and he had happened to be captured with his men together. And then there was other um, generals or leaders that were with their other men, and they were in different parts of the prison camp. And realized this prison camp didn't give you a date and a time you're going to get out. So it's not like you're in prison and you're gonna get out. There was a no determination of when you were going to get out or when you were going to, uh, or or if you were ever going to survive, if you
Mm.
were ever going to see your family again. And for me, General Stockdale represented this paradox thinking, um, and he had two beliefs, and the belief in his mind was, we're going to get through this. We are going to get out of this. We are going to push through it. We're going to do whatever it takes. We don't know when. We don't know where. We live with being ambiguous. We live with the feeling that the only thing that we want to have is this resolve that we're going to get through. We know we're going to be tortured. We know there's going to be bad days. There's going to be no food. There's going to be famine. There's going to be, so forth. But we are going to trudge this out. But we will get through it. In the end, we will prevail.
Mm.
So, in the end, General Stockdale and his troops did prevail. 8 years later, they were out. The war ended. They were able to get out. What was interesting, more interesting to me, was the question posed to General Stockdale. Okay, you made it out. What about the ones that didn't make it out? What was going on in their mind? And he just stopped and whoever the person was interviewing him, I think it was Jim Collins who wrote the book, Good
I
to
believe it
Great.
was, yeah, Good to Great,
Yeah.
yeah.
And he looked at him and he said, you know what? Um, the people who didn't get out were the optimists. And but when you look and you go, oh, the way he was thinking he was optimistic, not really. The optimists were the guys that were saying, it's okay, we're going to get out of here at Easter. By Easter, guaranteed we'll be out. So Easter would come, Easter would go. And then they'd say, all right, by Labor Day, we're going to get out. Labor Day would come, Labor Day would go. What that did to your, when your leader starts saying that to you, that things are going to clear up by a certain date, it becomes a wish rather than a conviction. And what happens is when it doesn't happen, things get more dire. And really, spirit of those people, those optimists that he called them, I don't know if they would be considered optimists. They were certainly weren't optimistic by the time they got to fifth, 7 or 8 Easters that were coming and going.
Sure. Yeah.
But those are the ones that didn't make it out because their spirits were broken. They became weaker. They didn't eat, and so forth. So there's a really interesting point about leadership when it comes to this is that, and we talked about it. Again, this all points to one thing that I've been preaching: stoicism, being stoic, understanding the ups, the downs, regardless of all the good things, regardless of all the bad things. We're gonna hold resolve in the middle.
Right.
We're gonna just continue to stay resolved in the middle. And that was the thing that really kind of took him to getting out of those camps and actually living a great life, writing a book. Actually, he ran for vice. He was one of the vice presidential candidate with Ross Perot back in the 90s. But a brilliant guy and a brilliant leader that I totally respect. Who goes back to the old Stoic world.
Sure. Was that something too that you spoke about evolving and evolving as a leader, as a business owner, entrepreneur, life and all that? Was that something too that evolved for you? Was in your earlier career of being an entrepreneur, you were more optimistic? Hey, this year we're going to end up doing this, and you would find that, hey, okay, we didn't hit that goal, and there would be that shit, this isn't what I expected. And as time went on, it was kind of, as long as we're moving forward on that ambiguous path and we're doing the things that we need to do, certain things will reveal themselves as far as what we should continue to do and what we shouldn't do. But the things that we need to have happen will happen in due time.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And that's, I learned, it's great to be able to say, hey, by next year we'll be living, the company will be up here and we'll get there. But you got to be able to understand that the path ahead of you is going to be treacherous. It's new. When we talk about going down a hidden path, every inch of it is new. We can only see a few feet in front of us. So we know that we should be moving forward. As long as we continue to move forward, as long as we be able to have resolve, as long as we know that our competitor is doing this, and this, which could change our trajectory, or we have financial issues within the company, or we haven't got our sales aren't where they need to be. We need to fix it. We need to move forward. We need to continue. We need to acknowledge all these things are happening. Never live in a fantasy world. Never live in a world where there's, this everything is a fantasy and we're going to get there and let's bury our heads, even though this is happening. I'm not saying worry. Worry is not the answer.
Mm-hmm.
It's just dealing with the brutal facts.
And knowing that just pushing forward, doing the things that need to be done will eventually lead to the outcome that you're hoping for. Yeah. And I've experienced that in different ways myself, not to the level of you, of course, but there were different things that I've done where because guess the best way to explain this is that I had ideas of what I wanted to do and what I thought could possibly happen. And a lot of those things did not happen, but even better things did, just because of the fact that I was doing the work needed. I was
Yeah.
putting forth the effort that was needed to get to it. And other things happened that really surpassed what I kind of expected to happen. But then again, at the same time, there were also things that happened that brought everything, down, where you had to kind of sit back and look at it and say, okay, this wasn't what I expected, but you still have to have that resolve, that mindset, that belief that as long as we keep just pushing forward, plowing through, which is a thing that you've also said too, when it comes back to your football days, is just put your head down, push forward. As long as you're doing that, the result, should eventually come. Just so you don't have to say that it's going to be this quarter, or it's going to be next, or the end of this year, or whatever it might be. It's just keep pushing forward.
Yeah, no, the way I've learned this, exactly like you, right? My three prior failed businesses prior to any success was based around that kind of thinking. Was like that, oh, things are going to work out, or I'm going to ignore that this is going on. I'm not going to challenge what a competitor is doing. I'm just going to surpass them. But he may be doing something really more innovative, and I got to start thinking more innovation. Or I just continue down the road. So I've done, that's happened to me totally. And again, that's where, and we talked about this last episode, so I won't beleaguer it, but that's when you get to the point, when you get to those points where you deal with the brutal facts and things don't look good, you need to make some changes. That's where the pivot, right? That's what we talked about. That's where the pivot comes in. Pivot comes in, right? We turn, we twist, turn, tweak, and then we grow again, and we continue to move forward.
Yeah.
But the pivot is part of the brutal facts.
Right. It's a lot of emotions that you go through between the ups, the downs, looking at stoicism, and, not everything is going to be terrible forever. Not everything is going to be great forever. There's always going to be the ups and downs, and to accept that. So emotions play a huge role in decision-making as a leader. What have you learned over your, the past 30-something years of being an entrepreneur and having the ups, the downs, and a lot of how to manage those different emotions as time goes on, and how did they evolve for you?
Yeah. Are you talking more about the emotions of just being in the game, you mean? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, as far as, if you want to be a leader, a good business owner, and things like that, there's the emotions that you have to go through as a leader that's going to push you through, and especially if you have employees and you have people on the payroll and things like that. And like you said, hey, the money's not coming in or whatever, or you have to make a big decision that could have significant effects one way or the other. How have you learned to manage those emotions?
Yeah, those are tough. I mean, when if you do things like downsize or so forth. Luckily, I didn't do that a lot. Probably in some of the failed businesses, I probably should have downsized earlier. Might have been able to get us through some of the waves that happened. But I think you got to be brutally honest with people. So the emotions play out that way. I mean, you can't tell them every single thing that worries you.
Sure.
It's like, it's like anything else as a leader. You want to give everybody the honest truth and the feeling, and so forth, but unnecessary worry. You don't want to drop unnecessary worry on them. Yeah, right. We go back to that, the Mark Twain, 99% of things that I worried about never happened. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to just throw my crazy worries on people, because I was a worrier. I really was.
Yeah.
But the reality was that I knew, and I was honest with them how I felt about things. I made it very clear. I always made it very clear, from an emotional standpoint, when things were going really well. That's when I felt like we needed to buckle the hatches, and stay that way. How could things be up here? You want to hang on to when things are going great. It just inevitably happens that things go ebb and flow.
Sure.
But so the emotion of wanting people to stay at their best, during this period of time? How can we keep this great run going? Or how can 1 year go like this, and then the next year go, slightly down? How do we keep that up? So there's honesty in letting them understand that that is not an issue for me, but I guess a concern for me as the business goes.
So I would also expect that being a good leader also means that you have to help build other leaders in the company as well, especially the executives, higher level management and so forth. That trickles down to their employees, to their subordinates, and all that kind of stuff. I would have to expect that General Stockdale, when he was going through it, he had his bad days. He had those emotional days that were just like, this. We're probably not getting out of here, or most of us are not getting out of here. But I can't let the team know that. I can't let the guys know that. I have to deal with this, like you said. I have to deal with this emotion kind of on my own. Get through it, not portray that with certain people. But I would think that there's certain people in your network, certain people that you talk to, that you do have to express, those emotions, even those weaknesses that you might have. What are those people that you talk to? How do you find those? Are those people within the business? Are those coaches? Are those mentors? What's the right balance kind of there?
Well, I think you said it early. Was like you need to develop leaders within your organization. Everybody should be a leader. Everybody should have a responsibility. As far as I'm concerned, any business, people have to be responsible. And what was so important to me as a leader was to take someone and go, okay, you are running a process within this business, right? You're a good example. Someone is handling operations, and you're this deep in operational duties. So, right, we talked about taking the hat off, right? So they're doing everything. So early in the business, first I'm doing it, right? And then I hire someone, and then I go, here you go, here's 10 hats, you wear it now. So that person's wearing 10 hats, and they want to slowly, you want to train them and work with them to be able to take those 10 hats off, at least 9 of those hats, right? And she becomes the leader of this group that she develops. She becomes the director of operations, right? She comes in as handling the operations, and the evolution of that is to work with that person to be able to bring down the workload so she can be a leader and manage the process rather than implement and be in the process daily. Now, there's times you got to roll over, there's ebb and flows there too, because as things start going down, I hired the right person, this person taking over this person taking over this. Oh, we hired the wrong person. I got to go back to this. And then it goes down again. Right? I guess if people are watching us on video, when I say back to this, I'm saying that they are filled to the brim with work, and slowly you take those things down until it goes all the way down until you're managing. And managing means that you're not knee deep, you're not even ankle deep in it. You're actually literally, and when person can take that role and become the leader of that department, that's when the business soars. That's in the business. Those 10 hats are now given out. 10 people are fulfilling their duties. Everybody's rowing that boat. And that department, the operational part of that business, is flowing. We did the same with you in sales, right? We promoted you in sales to become a leader as we move forward, growing that department, growing those things. Those were all good examples of leadership. It's not just like this dictator that's standing on top of everybody and everybody's down at the same level. It's not a socialist type of business.
Right.
The business model should be, it should be about middle management and so forth. But, real true leaders who learn and absorb leadership. And I spent a lot of time, and developing leaders within the company. And that was from workshops, seminar. It wasn't wasteful stuff. It was stuff that I thought was so important. Um, and I took my time to do that. I took my time away from, all the tasks I had to do to, hey, I got to develop leaders here. If I don't develop leaders, this is going to, I'm never going to have a life I want. It's going to be just a constant struggle to build this business.
Right, right. Well, when you, because I remember that very, very well. Because I remember you even saying when I kind of got the promotion to the business development manager, it was really only me. At that time, hey, listen, you're gonna take this. You're gonna get to the point where you get so inundated with work that I want you to find somebody from within the company that you think would be able to take some of that stuff off. But I want you to focus on the things that you realize that you can do very, very well, and some of the things that you struggle with, I guess, would kind of be my weaknesses. And then give them to somebody.
So well, Craig. I know your weaknesses and your strengths.
Yeah.
I know myself, because it's funny, because it's just it's a good thing you've worked for me, and not only just working for me, but just knowing you, being able to see that.
Yeah. And that was a thing too, because when we decided to bring Joanne in to the department, she was the first one in there. I realized that she would be able to handle those things that I was doing, that was part of the job that needed to get done, but I knew I could concentrate on the things that I did better. So I, like you said, took some of those hats off and said, instead of having to wear 10, now I only have to wear, 6 or 7 of them. But let me give these 3 things that are very, very important, that I know that I struggle with a little bit more. That is and get that over to her, because I realized, or we all kind of realized, that she would be the perfect, person to be able to handle these things. So when it comes down to, to the weaknesses and all that kind of stuff, is that something that you would recommend, is to really kind of look at what you struggle with as a leader, that are the things that need to get done on a regular basis? Know the process, understand the process, and then say, okay, my time would be much better suited focusing here. So then, and that's how you start to develop that leader, that person that can handle that, and then eventually kind of have her follow, or have that person follow the same kind of thing. Get to that point where it becomes so overwhelming, or not so overwhelming where things start to fail, but to the point of, okay,
close.
We start to grow a little bit more. We grow 5-10% more than where we're at now. Now I'm going to be completely overwhelmed, and things are going to fall through the cracks. Now let's bring in somebody, and then they start to develop that leader. So it is a hierarchy in a way, but it's a hierarchy in a very beneficial way.
I guess in a big corporation, you never get to that point where you get so overwhelmed that then you got to hire someone. Usually, in the big corporate world, they're a little bit more efficient. They'll look at it and go, okay, we need to bring somebody in here because now we see this thing starting to get bigger. In a small, startup, you're right. You get to a point where things can be overwhelming. I've been so damn close to the wheels falling off the cart in some of these some of these areas that we had to bring in a hire and get it going fast. We had to get somebody up and running fast. We made some mistakes that way. I think what I got better at was anticipating those issues and again, it's all experience, right? The wisdom comes from experience. The wisdom comes from the experience of knowing in this particular situation that, hey, I see the wheels starting to wobble. We got to get somebody in here, and in the past, the wheels would be really wobbling and falling off the cart. And then you got to do the cleanup and all the other pieces to it. You'll learn as you go.
Sure. Like you said before, you attended workshops, you spoke to different people. Richard was a big part of that, with his company and doing those tests even during that time and moving forward in your other businesses and so forth. So speaking to other leaders, other entrepreneurs, whatever it might be, whether or not they're at a higher level than you or somewhat even below you, that are doing something successful or successfully, approaching their day to day, is going to help to glean some wisdom and, from some of their experiences that you can bring forward and say, hey, this is a really good idea that we could try to implement,
Right.
as long as we're following that right path. But I guess the big thing is that there's lots of different leaders, right? Or so-called leaders, right? What do you define success as a leader? And, we'll go back to the word that we've used here quite a bit on this is evolved. Has that success definition evolved for you over time and over your experience as well? Kind of where did it start that you thought, okay, this is, if I continue to do this, and as a leader, and this is what I define success as, how did that change, over the years? And could you ever go back to saying, okay, this is success at this stage? Or would it always kind of be based off of like what you feel is success now, knowing that could also evolve and change over time too?
Yeah, I mean, leadership does change, especially for me going in and out of 5 companies. My leadership style actually changed. The way I did things. I think more toward the end, with Thrive, I was much more of, I probably got really good at finding the right people and bringing them in. I think that was the biggest change for me. So it made life easier. It made the build out of that company very quick too, because we got it got back to the right people on the bus. Like I really understood that well, that they get the right people, and then let's figure it all out once we get the right people, and then let's build this business out. So that business, I mean, you can even see the evolution of me. That business really was a 3-year startup, right? That was sold. And then you go back to NHA, it was, 15 years. So, and I made a lot of mistakes in those 15 years. Hiring, firing, decisions, wrong decisions, bad decisions. So yeah, I did evolve. What kind of definition is success for a leader? I think it does go back to, it's not about you. If you want to be a great leader, you got to understand it's not about you. This is not a personality contest or a popularity contest. You don't always have to be loved, but you want to be respectful to people. You end up being liked because you're respectful and because you do the right thing. A humble leader, you don't have to be this outrageous maniac. Those kind of people are gone now. They don't even exist anymore. The big talkers, the most successful, and we can go back to the book Good to Great. For those of you who have ever read it, or those of you who want to read it, it's an interesting. It's really a study of the most successful companies, and then it dug back. It really dug into who the leaders were, and most of these leaders were these humble, self-aware people that were able to help build companies and not at all be about themselves. And they're probably one of the biggest things is hiring smarter people than myself. Bring in people that know more. Bring in people. There's nothing smarter than I know that making that decision. Building your business. Don't get caught up in yourself. Don't get caught up with your ego. To sell your business, when I got to a point of selling your business, one thing I learned, I got to make myself less relevant. If I sell a company, I'm so relevant, they're not going to want to get rid of me. They don't want to buy the business because it's all about me.
Right.
So the less relevant you become as a leader to the outside world. You could be relevant to your people.
Sure.
But the less relevant that you are, the more success. So again, it's another weird paradox, right? It's a paradox of I want to be a strong leader, but I don't want to be that relevant because you want other people to take the reins. You want to be able to walk away. God forbid you're ill or sick and you can't run your business. You need to have that second and even third and even fourth in charge prepared to go. So for me, those that's been the evolution, or my definition of a successful leader is someone who doesn't have the ego, doesn't need the ego, um, and doesn't know it all.
Right.
We talked about this before. I mean, we're all human. We don't know everything. We just don't know everything.
Yeah.
And if anybody claims they do, and you're listening to a podcast about someone that claims they know everything, turn that podcast off, because that's not what it's about.
Sure.
We're all human. We all make mistakes. And like I said earlier in another podcast, it's all about, the only thing I can give you is my wisdom. And my wisdom is learned by mistakes.
Mm.
So, look for the guy who gave you who has more mistakes. You'll learn from him. Or learn from the guy who doesn't repeat his mistakes either. But that's important.
Right, right. We have a few audience questions that came in over the last couple of weeks that
I did look at a few of them this time.
Yeah. I compiled them,
but I don't think I saw them all. How many do you have?
I have three. I have three that I compiled kind of from a list of the questions, and knowing that this episode was going to be about leadership and things like that. I think that these are a couple good ones. Hopefully you think so as well. But before we get into that question, one last thing that I want to find out, there was quite a few words that you threw out in your last response. If you were to say
way too many words,
if you were to pick something, a word that makes a really good leader, you've said humble before, it's one of the words that you use a lot. Is there one word that you think is kind of what do you think is the best word that is what makes a good leader? Is it being humble, or is it something different?
Yeah, well, there's so many words like I could use. I guess more than anything, honest. Maybe that's a good word. I just have to just keep it at a word. Honest, which basically is giving people the brutal truth, the brutal facts, all those things. I think honesty is the best thing you could do as a leader with your people.
And yourself, I guess, being honest with yourself and being self-aware and realizing, hey, we need to either make changes, or this wasn't the best idea, or I should not have said yes to this thing that I said yes to, or whatever it might be. So you have to figure it out from both angles.
Yeah, and a good leader also takes the fall on a lot of things, maybe a little bit too much, but maybe I'm more neurotic. But I've even said this to you when I failed with employees that they were either going to leave or we let them go. My conversations with them, and it wasn't a false conversation. I really believe this. I really believe we failed them in some way. They may have failed us in some way too, but we failed them in some way. So to me, that's also part of honesty as an employer.
And is there a way to navigate that and kind of figure out, like you said, of course, typically when you get rid of somebody or have to fire somebody, it's, they failed at their position, but like you said, it's in a way you feel like you failed them. How do you navigate that? Is there ways to understand that? So when that decision comes around, when you have to get rid of somebody, and you also have to think about it, like, how did we fail them? How do you figure that one out, or is it come kind of before, or does it come after?
Conversation, and sometimes I'll ask, like, what did we do? I know you're leaving. What did we do? What could we have done differently? I also asked them what they could have done differently. But those difficult kind of conversations, like when someone's leaving or let someone go or whatever, those are things that you just got to dive into. You got to be good at that, and good at taking it on the chin when you need to.
Sure.
To tell you how you guys were horrible to me. I've had people come to me and say, I didn't like the culture here. I'm like, oh boy, what was great about that was it gave me incentive to change a culture.
Sure.
It gave me incentive to build out. I'll never forget when we sold NHA. Guy Mike Rizone, and Mike said to me at he was a guy who a lot of consulting work for us in the sales. And he just said, based on all this business I've worked with, you guys have like the most amazing culture, and that's why your business was successful. And I took that as a, thank you. But that was something I worked hard on. It wasn't that way in the beginning. It was probably the worst culture in the beginning. Probably before you came on board, I was a raving nut. I just didn't know how to act. I was an early, younger entrepreneur that just didn't even know how to be a leader.
Right. So it evolved over time. Yeah. All right. Awesome. Well, I think that's a good way to end that part. But we have these questions that I think are going to be very useful to this conversation as well. I feel are even more useful than they were when I put them together, when I compiled them for this.
Right.
So start with the first one from Susan R. In Phoenix, Arizona. I have a very introverted nature, which is not the typical bold, outspoken leadership style that many recognize in business today. How can quieter, more reserved individuals like myself still demonstrate strong leadership presence with their teams?
Yeah, again, it's not the leaders of today don't have to be these strong presence. They have to be these positive, impactful, honest, humble people. And so there is no need to be something you're not. Especially if you're not, if you don't like getting up there speaking to people, you don't need to be this person that gets up and does a press conference with your staff every week. I've seen leaders like that just love doing State of Unions. They do it way too often. So I do believe that, there doesn't have to be anything but, and honesty. I hate to repeat myself, but we kind of answered a lot of that question about being humble, being honest, being forthright. You need to ask questions. You need to trust. You need to be able to give trust to people. You need to have those conversations. As much as you're quiet and everything else, you still need to have the difficult conversations that you got to put yourself into.
Sure.
If you're not good at that, go work on that, because that's important. Difficult conversations are so important. Difficult conversations. Things like when you sit down with employees and say, listen, you've been doing this and I don't like it. It's not good for morale for the team. It's unacceptable. Those conversations need to come out. And I had to push myself early on to do that as well. I wasn't great at having those difficult conversations, but being humble, honest, and being able to be forthright. You don't have to be a great talker. You don't have to be a preacher. That's not leadership. There are some great leaders out there that do that, get the morale, the troops going, but ultimately you need to have the qualities of honesty, humbleness, and the ability to dig deep as it, handling conversation.
I agree with you there too, as far as having to have the difficult conversations, kind of find that middle ground, because you can also have the complete opposite if you were an extrovert and you were extremely outgoing and, like you said, had those powwow meetings all the time, and even started to develop, relationships with, your employees because you are more outgoing and not as quiet. Then when you do have to have those difficult conversations, this is unacceptable. It probably becomes very difficult to do that, because now it's kind of like you're friendly with that person at the same time.
Yeah. And it was, it was that, I don't know whoever made the quote, but it was like, I don't know the secret to success, but I know the secret to failure. And that's trying to get everybody to like you.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, you're not there to be loved and adored. You're there to lead. And whatever that leadership style that you have, you want to be the best at it. You want people to accept it and be motivated by it. But, Not everyone's going to be. Not everybody's going to love you.
Right.
Get that? Again, it goes back to being not relevant. You don't have to be so relevant all the time.
This one we did kind of answer a bit throughout this episode, but I think it's we can kind of consolidate some of that and maybe expand on a couple things. But this comes from Mark H. in Miami. I find myself so buried in dealing with day-to-day operations and putting out fires that I struggle to carve out strategic thinking time. What time management tactics do you use as a leader to focus on the bigger picture?
Yeah, I mean, you can get, this goes to the planning of building out that business and what those tasks are, and releasing tasks to other people. I think, sometimes when you get there, it's a little bit of a trust issue going on there too. I don't get around to, getting my people zeroed in on things that they need to be doing. If you're living in your own world, you're not leading. You're just running. You're sitting behind a desk and you're evolved. I mean, you got all this stuff going on around you, and you haven't evolved yourself to be able to get up and build out a process in strategically thinking about building a business. So, I talked about setting up time for yourself. I know it's cliche to say, but you got to put time in yourself to think strategically. And remember, I told you my weekend I spent, with my weekend at Bernie's, right, where I just sat and tried to figure out strategically how to build this business. You got to do that. You got to get some realization, and maybe it's working with an outside source that can help you focus. But you got to learn to work on the business, not just in the business.
Right.
So the concept, right, working on it, being overseeing and working on the business to build it. And that's where I evolved more as I grew and got into Thrive. I was much more of a working on the business guy than the day-to-day CEO that was working in it and on it. I was much more at a higher level of looking at it, viewing it, and seeing it as I was, years earlier, where I was involved. So you got to be able to differentiate to work in the business and on the business.
I would think that, again, one of those, like the tests that you say, could probably also be very, very beneficial to somebody like Mark who asked this question, to do one of those tests, figure those kind of things out, figure out what the strengths, what your weaknesses are, and then try to figure out, a solution from there.
Yeah. No, great point. Yeah. No, those are excellent. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, now that excites me. I'm going to get some information on those tests on the next episode. And we'll also sit down with Richard, because we are going to bring in some guests to be able to talk about things as the new year, as we're in. By the time this is aired, we'll be in the new year. But early on, we'll start bringing in some guests.
Yeah, absolutely. And our final question, this in a way is somewhat similar to some of the things that we've talked about as well. Olivia S. in Denver. I aim to empower my employees to take initiative, but I find it is very hard to delegate important tasks that I know that I could execute faster. How do you overcome the urge to take back control?
Well, by the way, it's the worst thing you do is take back control, right? Take control. That's not good either. But once you give somebody something and then take it back, that sucks. So you probably one of the biggest phrases I hate. And don't even ask me why I hate this, but it's like if you want to do something right, do it yourself. Right. I hate it. It's not a good statement. It's not true. You got to trust in people. You got to hire the right people to be able to. I get it. Sometimes you fail with somebody and you got to take something back. I get that. That happens. I'm not saying that's never going to happen. But if you haven't properly got it prepared, then that's another situation. That's your problem. That's your fault. you got to have trust. You know, so going from my worst quote or whatever the hell that it was that I said to probably something I really always loved was Abe Lincoln was, I rather trust people and be disappointed once in a while than trust no one and be miserable the rest of my life.
Mm.
So you got to be able to bring in the right people, trust them to do what they need to do. You got to listen to what Mr. Lincoln said, and you got to put it out there. Yes, it's not easy to let go of things. I get it. I've been through it. But once you do, it's freeing. It's a freeing thing to be able to delegate. Once you understand and get a good feel on how to delegate and what to do, and this may be a subject we talk about later at another time where we spent some focus on it, but being able to delegate and trust that people are going to get things done. Really cool book I read years ago. No, we did it with NHA, which was the Who Will Do What by When. Do you remember that book? That was a book that was written by someone that I actually knew. And it was all about actually literally meetings and how to make meetings more successful and literally dealing with people. And it was these commitments and who will do what by when was like, okay, so Craig, you're going to do this project and this is what you're going to do. So the who was Craig, the what was this project. Let's say it's a sales project that we need to get done. We need a review of what our customers are saying about something, and who will do what, and by when will you have this report done? Right? And when you could take something, put it in a box like that, and go, here you go, and if they come back with that information, their integrity is intact, right? They committed, they're doing it, their integrity is intact. When they don't do it, or they don't do it on the prescribed by when time, that's when you lose integrity. And this book was really, that's the name of the book, Who Will Do What by When. And it was really based around people having integrity. So when you run a meeting and you give somebody something to do and they accept it and they don't come back with it or don't follow through, then their integrities, they lose integrity. There are other parts to it where, of course, if something gets in the way and they warn you, hey, I got this thing that came up, I can't get to it. That's obviously acceptable.
Sure.
But ultimately, you want to be able to box that into people and have them do that. It'll give you much more trust. And once you get a flow like that going, that opens up things so much easier.
Right. The quote that you hate, when you said that and explained it that way, kind of makes me think about your whole scaling and traction philosophy. Everybody always talks about scaling, but you need to have that traction first. So would you say that maybe a better way to say that quote that you hate, if you want to do something right, you got to do it yourself, or if you want to get something right, you got to do it yourself? Would it be better to just add the word first to it? So if you want to do something right, you have to do it yourself first. Really understand the process, and then be able to share that with them.
That changes the whole quote. But I'm talking about when presented with the fact that you can hand off something to someone.
Right.
At the beginning of a business, you're doing everything yourself, right? Because you just can't afford to do. You could suck at 15 of the 20 things that you do, and then you got to hand it off. But if your decision is I'm going to do it myself rather than bring anybody else in, I have a choice to give it to other people. That's what I hate to quote. But yes, you've got to be good at certain things, obviously, to pass those on to people. Correct. Good point. Good
Absolutely.
point. Yes. Yeah.
And I think that's
I still hate the quote though.
Yeah, no, it is. It's one of those quotes that it's thrown around a lot. My wife says it to me sometimes if I don't, clean up a pan right or something like that.
Believe me, my wife says the same stuff to me too.
And maybe that's why we hate the quote so much. But
I actually like it when she says it to me because she actually does it. but I'm talking when you're presented in a challenge with it. You're presented with something that you can easily pass off, and you don't pass off because you don't trust that person.
Mm.
That's not good.
And I guess that's why it's important bringing in, those people, understanding that you understand the process, you know how to do the process. And your job as a leader is to find the people that are, hopefully in that way smarter than you. To say, hey, look, this is how you do this, or this is how I figured out how to do this, or whatever. This is what I've been doing. If you figure out a better way to do this, a more efficient, effective way, then by all means do it. But you at least need to.
By the way, that was the story of my life. Every time I brought somebody else in to do what I was doing, they did it a better way. So it worked out well.
Right. Absolutely. So, well, that's awesome. This was another fun episode. I really enjoyed this. I don't know if you have any last minute things that you want to say to wrap up this episode.
No, I just think we just need to trust people. We need to feel as leaders that we are not there to dominate. We're there to help people evolve. Help the business evolve at the same time. And that's what leadership is all about. And, kind of think about that Stockdale paradox, because it's a very cool way to look at leadership, unwavering faith along with brutal facts.
For sure. I want to thank Susan, Mark, and Olivia for sending in their questions as well. If any of you listening have any questions for us, feel free to send them in. You can find us on Twitter or X, whichever you want to call it, Instagram, TikTok.
And LinkedIn, you could find me and you and so forth.
Absolutely. So with that, again, another cool episode. Thanks for spending the time with me here, Jon. And we will talk to you guys soon. Have a great one. Take care.
Thank you.